The neon glow of the Bellagio's fountains painted my windshield in shifting blues and golds as I wrapped up another case. May 3rd, 2024. A Friday that started like any other in my 20-year career as a private investigator. I'd just nailed a card-counting crew working the high roller tables, my instincts sharp as ever after 2 decades of chasing liars and cheats through the desert playground of Las Vegas. "Harlan, you beautiful bastard," my old contact detective Kirkland had said when I handed over the evidence. "How'd you spot them so fast?" "Same way I spot everything else," I replied, pocketing my fee. "People think they're smarter than they are." The irony of those words would haunt me later. I pulled into our driveway in Summerlin just as Nina's BMW swung in behind me. She stepped out in her signature black dress, the one that made her look 10 years younger than her 44 years, her auburn hair catching the desert sunset. Even after 19 years of marriage, she could still turn heads, including mine. "Perfect timing," she called out, her voice carrying that infectious energy that had landed her another 6-figure corporate event contract that afternoon. "How was the casino?" "Caught the cheaters. How was the pitch?" "Sealed it." She flashed that $1 million smile. "The pharmaceutical conference wants me to handle their entire Vegas weekend. We're talking serious money, baby." Inside, our kids were already setting up for our weekly poker tournament. Ava, 17 and sharp as a blade, shuffled cards with the precision of a dealer. Logan, 15 and all arms and legs, had rigged up some kind of chip-counting app on his tablet. "Dad's home," Ava announced without looking up. "Ready to lose?" "We'll see about that," I said, loosening my tie. Nina kicked off her heels and settled into her chair. "Same stakes as always?" "Nothing this family can't handle," I replied, dealing the first hand. The ritual felt sacred. All 4 of us around the table, the outside world locked out for a few hours. Nina yawned halfway through the 3rd hand. "Sorry, these therapy appointments are draining me. Dr. Martinez really makes me dig deep." I nodded, though something nagged at me. Nina had been going to therapy for months now, supposedly working through stress from her expanding business. But she seemed more wound up lately, not less. "Maybe you should switch therapists," I suggested. "No, she's helping. Just takes time." Nina folded her cards. "I'm beat. Rain check on the rest?" That night, as she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling thinking about patterns. In my line of work, everything was about patterns. The tells that gave away a cheating spouse, the financial irregularities that exposed embezzlement, the tiny inconsistencies that unraveled elaborate lies. The next week blurred together in a familiar rhythm. I spent my days tailing a high roller who'd been skimming from his company's Vegas accounts, photographing his every move from the Aria to the Win. Nina bounced between venue scouts and client meetings, her calendar packed with the controlled chaos of event planning. Then the package arrived. May 10th, a Friday evening. I was teaching Logan how to set up a basic surveillance camera in his room. Not for anything serious, just satisfying his curiosity about my work, when Nina called from the kitchen. "Honey, there's a package for you. No return address." I found her holding a small padded envelope with "Watch Alone" written in block letters across the front. Inside was a USB drive, nothing else. "Probably case materials," I said, pocketing it. "You know how paranoid some clients get." That night we settled in for a family movie, some action flick the kids picked. Nina curled up against me on the couch, her hand on my chest, but her phone kept buzzing. After the 3rd text, she glanced at it and frowned. "Everything okay?" I asked. just Victor from college. He's in town for some networking thing, wants to catch up. She set the phone aside. Ancient history. Victor Reeves. I remembered him vaguely. Nina's boyfriend before we met. Some smooth-talking finance guy who'd moved to Chicago after graduation. Strange that he'd surface now after all these years. When everyone finally headed to bed, I retreated to my home office and plugged in the USB. The single video file was time-stamped 3 weeks ago. Grainy night vision footage from what looked like a motel parking lot. 2 figures emerged from a room. A woman in a distinctive red coat and a man whose face was partially obscured by shadows. My blood went cold. The woman was Nina. I'd bought her that coat for Christmas. The audio was muffled, but I caught fragments as they walked toward their cars. Can't keep covering for you. And they'll expose everything if you don't. I ran the audio through my professional software, cleaning up the background noise and enhancing the male voice. It took me 3 tries, but when I finally isolated it clearly, my hands started shaking. Victor, Nina's college ex. I cross-referenced the timestamp with Nina's calendar. Thursday, April 18th, 7:30 p.m. Her therapy appointment. The rest of the footage showed them kissing before getting into separate cars. I sat in that dark office until dawn, watching the video over and over, my detective's mind cataloging every detail, the intimacy between them, the urgency in their voices, the way Nina looked around nervously before getting in her car. This wasn't some chance encounter. This was ongoing. By morning, I had a plan. "You're up early," Nina said when she found me making coffee at 6 a.m. She looked beautiful in her silk robe, hair tousled from sleep. Couldn't shut my brain off. New case. She moved behind me, arms sliding around my waist. "Want to talk about it?" "You know I can't discuss ongoing investigations." I kept my voice steady, professional. Inside, I was documenting everything. The slight tremor in her voice, the way her eyes avoided mine, and the reflection on the coffee pot. "Of course, you seem tense." "It's a complicated case. Married couple, trust issues." I turned in her arms, studying her face. Amazing how people can lie to the ones they love most. Something flickered in her expression. Guilt, fear, maybe both. People are complicated, Harlan. Sometimes they make choices they never thought they'd make. "Yeah," I said softly. "They do." That weekend, I played the devoted family man while quietly launching the most important investigation of my career. Sunday brunch at our favorite spot in Henderson. Nina laughed and chatted with the kids, every inch the loving mother. But I was reading her like I would any other subject, noting the forced brightness in her smile, the way she checked her phone whenever she thought I wasn't looking. Monday morning, I began surveillance. Following Nina required all my skills. She knew my car, my habits, my techniques. I had to stay invisible while tracking someone who'd lived with a private investigator for nearly 2 decades. I used rental cars, changed my appearance, kept my distance. Her first stop wasn't Dr. Martinez's office. It was a coffee shop in downtown Vegas where Victor waited at a corner table, looking every bit the successful finance guy he'd become. Expensive suit, designer watch, the kind of confident posture that came from years of closing deals. Through my telephoto lens, I watched them argue in hushed tones. Nina's body language was defensive, apologetic. Victor's was commanding, almost threatening. When he handed her an envelope, she hesitated before taking it. That afternoon, I made some calls. My network in Vegas was extensive. Cops, casino security, financial investigators, people who owed me favors. Within hours, I had a preliminary profile on Victor Reeves. He wasn't just in finance anymore. Court records showed connections to several businesses under federal scrutiny. Gaming Commission reports mentioned his name in association with suspected money laundering operations. He'd become what we called in the business a fixer, someone who solved problems for people who couldn't go to legitimate authorities. The question was, what kind of problem did Nina have that required Victor's services? I got my answer the next week when I managed to plant an audio device in Nina's car. In Nevada, I only needed one-party consent for recording, and technically, it was my car too. We'd bought it together. The conversation I captured made my stomach drop. "The online games are bleeding me dry," Nina's voice thick with desperation. "I'm in for 60,000 now." 60? Victor sounded incredulous. "Jesus, Nina, when you said you had gambling debts, I thought we were talking about a few grand." It started small, just some poker apps to unwind after work. But then I found the high-stakes games and I thought I could win it back. You thought wrong. These aren't Vegas casinos, sweetheart. These are offshore operations with very real collection methods. That's why I need your help. The event planning business is legitimate money. We can wash whatever you need through my corporate accounts. And what does your husband think about all this? A long pause. Harlan doesn't know about any of it. The gambling, the debts, us. Us. Victor's voice carried a dark amusement. Is that what we're calling this? Don't. Nina's voice cracked. You said you'd help if you remembered how good we used to be together. Yeah, I did say that. A car door slammed. Set up the next event. I'll bring my associates. They'll pay in cash. You'll invoice them through your business. Everyone's happy. And my debts will disappear as long as you keep being cooperative. I sat in my car outside the surveillance equipment rental shop, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. My wife wasn't just cheating. She was laundering money for organized crime figures. And she was using her business, the business we'd built together, to do it. But I wasn't some heartbroken husband ready to confront his wife in a jealous rage. I was a professional investigator who'd just uncovered a conspiracy. This required methodology, documentation, and patience. I called my old partner from the force, Sal Carmichael, who'd become one of the best divorce attorneys in Nevada after leaving the department. "Harlan, you dog? What's it been, 6 months? Too long. Listen, I need some hypothetical legal advice." Hypothetical. Sal's tone shifted to cautious professional. Shoot. Say someone discovered their spouse was using their joint business to launder money. What would be the best way to protect their assets in a divorce? Hypothetically, document everything. Nevada's a no-fault state, but financial misconduct can influence asset division. Community property laws usually split everything 50-50, but if you can prove dissipation of marital assets for illegal purposes, the innocent spouse gets protection. Exactly. But Harlan, if this isn't actually hypothetical, you need to be careful. Money laundering attracts federal attention, and federal attention attracts the kind of people who don't like witnesses. That night, Nina worked late on a client dinner. I used the time to dig deeper into her finances. Our joint accounts showed regular transfers to something called Martinez Consulting, supposedly her therapy payments. But Dr. Martinez was charging $200 an hour for sessions that lasted exactly 30 minutes, according to Nina's calendar. And she was having 5 sessions a week. It was a classic money movement scheme. Nina was funneling cash to Victor's operation under the cover of medical expenses. I also found her personal laptop hidden in her closet, protected by a password she thought I'd never guess. But after 19 years of marriage, I knew her better than she realized. Her mother's maiden name plus the year we met, Harrison 2005. The browser history told the whole story. Online poker sites, cryptocurrency exchanges, desperate Google searches for how to pay off gambling debts, and money laundering penalties, Nevada. But the most damning evidence was in her email drafts folder. Messages to Victor she'd written but never sent. I can't keep lying to Harlan. He's getting suspicious about the therapy appointments. The kids are asking questions about why I'm never home for dinner anymore. What if someone finds out about us? About the money? I love you, but I loved him first. This has to end. I printed everything. The next morning, I watched Nina get ready for work with new eyes. She'd always been meticulous about her appearance, but now I noticed the expensive jewelry I hadn't bought her. The designer handbag that cost more than our mortgage payment. The subtle changes that spoke of money flowing in from somewhere else. You look beautiful, I said, meaning it. Even knowing what I knew, I could still see why I'd fallen for her all those years ago. Thanks, baby. She kissed my cheek, and for a moment, I caught a whiff of unfamiliar cologne on her skin. I'll be late again tonight. Big client wants to see venue options for their Christmas party. Of course they do. I managed a smile. Make us rich, sweetheart. That afternoon, I made another call to my network, this time to an old friend at the Nevada Gaming Control Board. Frank Delano and I had worked together on several casino fraud cases over the years. He owed me a few favors. Frank, it's Harlan. I might have something you'd be interested in. I'm listening. Money laundering operation using event planning as a front. High-stakes players, offshore gambling debts, the works. You have evidence? Working on it. But the main player is Victor Reeves. Mean anything to you? A sharp intake of breath. We've been circling that bastard for months. Never could get close enough. You sure about this? I'm sure. Give me a few more weeks to build the case and I'll hand you everything you need. Harlan, this isn't personal, is it? I stared out my office window at the Vegas skyline, where Nina's latest event was probably taking place at that very moment. It's always personal, Frank. That's what makes us good at our jobs. The next few weeks blurred together in a careful dance of deception. I played the loving husband while methodically documenting my wife's crimes. I attended Ava's poker tournament at school, where she demolished the competition with the same analytical precision I'd taught her for reading people. I helped Logan debug his latest app project, marveling at how both my kids had inherited the investigative instincts that made me good at my job. If only I'd turned those instincts on my own household sooner. The breakthrough came when Nina landed her biggest contract yet. A luxury pharmaceutical conference at the area, complete with private poker games for the executives. She was so excited she could barely contain herself, bubbling over with details about the six-figure fee and the potential for future business. This is it, Harlan. This is the contract that sets us up for life. I smiled and congratulated her, knowing that this was exactly the kind of high-profile event that would attract Gaming Control Board attention once I made my call. 2 nights before the conference, Nina got a call that changed everything. I was in the garage pretending to organize my equipment while actually testing a new long-range microphone, when her voice carried through the thin walls. What do you mean, rated? No, Victor, I can't just cancel the event. There are hundreds of people coming. I don't care about your legal problems. No, don't you dare drag me into this. The call ended with the sound of something shattering, probably her phone hitting the wall. I found her in the kitchen, sweeping up the pieces of her shattered smartphone with shaking hands. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine, just fine." But her voice cracked on the words. Phone slipped out of my hands. "Nina." I moved closer, genuinely concerned despite everything I knew. "What's wrong?" She looked up at me with tears in her eyes, the first real emotion I'd seen from her in months. For a moment, I thought she might tell me everything. "I've made some terrible mistakes, Harlan. If you knew what I'd done, then tell me." I reached for her hands. "We're married. We're partners. Whatever it is, we can work through it together." She pulled away. "No. Some things can't be fixed." That night, she took a sleeping pill and was unconscious within an hour. I used the time to access her laptop again and found a flurry of encrypted messages from Victor's associates. The gaming control board raid had swept up several of his businesses, but apparently he'd gotten advance warning and managed to destroy most of the evidence. Except for one thing, the event contracts that Nina had been using to process payments. Those were legitimate business records, stored on servers that the feds could subpoena. Nina was about to become a very visible loose end. The next morning, she was gone before I woke up. No goodbye, no note, just an empty space in the bed and the smell of her perfume lingering in the air. Her suitcase was missing, along with her passport and emergency cash, but she'd left something behind. A letter on my desk, written in her careful handwriting. "Harlan, by the time you read this, you'll probably know everything. I can't face you or the kids after what I've done. The gambling started as stress relief, but it became an addiction. When the debts got too big, Victor offered to help, but his help came with strings attached. I thought I could control it, thought I could find a way out without destroying our family. I was wrong about everything. The house always wins. I just forgot I wasn't the house. Don't look for me. Don't let the kids blame themselves. And don't forgive me, because I'll never forgive myself." N. I read the letter 3 times before setting it aside and calling Frank Delano. "It's time," I said when he answered. "I'm sending you everything." The next few hours moved with the efficiency of a well-planned operation. The gaming control board, armed with my evidence, obtained warrants for Nina's business records. The FBI opened a federal investigation into Victor's money laundering network. And I sat in my office, watching 20 years of marriage dissolve into a collection of case files and legal documents. Ava knocked on my door around noon. "Dad, Mom's not answering her phone, and there's weird guys in suits asking questions around the neighborhood." I pulled her into the office and closed the door. Logan appeared moments later, drawn by the serious voices. "Kids, sit down. We need to talk." I told them everything, or at least the version they could handle. Their mother had gotten involved with some dangerous people. She'd made choices that put the family at risk. She was gone, and I didn't know when or if she'd be coming back. Ava, my analytical poker player, asked the hardest question. "Did you know? Before today?" I suspected something was wrong. "I've been investigating for a few weeks." "But you didn't try to stop her," Logan said. "It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. I couldn't stop her from making her own choices. I could only control how we responded to them." That afternoon, Sal came over to explain the legal process. Nevada's no-fault divorce laws were straightforward, but Nina's financial crimes complicated everything. Since she'd used marital assets for illegal activities, the court would likely award me a larger share of our remaining property. The good news, Sal said, is that your documentation is impeccable. The bad news is that there might not be much left to divide once the feds finish following the money trail. Over the next few weeks, the story leaked to the local media. Event planner disappears in federal money laundering probe. High-stakes poker debts lead to organized crime connections. Private investigator's wife vanishes after gaming commission raid. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The PI who'd spent his career catching cheating spouses had been married to one. But the real humiliation came from an unexpected source. A former client, someone whose cheating husband I'd exposed 5 years earlier, contacted a local blogger with her own story about Nina. Apparently, my wife had been bragging at her country club about how easy it was to fool a private investigator if you knew his methods. She said Harlan was so focused on other people's marriages, he never bothered to investigate his own, the woman told the blogger. She thought it was hilarious. The blog post went viral within hours. The private eye who couldn't see how Vegas PI Harlan Mitchell's wife played him for a fool. I should have been angry, should have felt humiliated. Instead, I felt something colder, a crystalline clarity that comes when all illusions fall away. I'd spent my career documenting other people's lies. Now I had the chance to document my own. 6 weeks after Nina disappeared, I launched a podcast called Missed Signals. Each episode analyzed a different case from my career, using real audio recordings and documents to show how investigations unfolded. But the final episode of the first season was special, a complete breakdown of my own wife's deception, narrated with the same professional detachment I'd bring to any other case. People often ask me how I miss the signs, I said into the microphone in my home studio. The truth is, I didn't miss them. I chose to ignore them. Love makes us stupid, but willful blindness makes us accomplices. This is the story of how I learned the difference. The episode broke download records. Suddenly, everyone wanted to hire the PI who'd turned his own humiliation into a masterclass in investigative technique. 3 months after Nina vanished, Victor Reeves was arrested in Reno trying to board a flight to the Cayman Islands. The federal case against him was solid. My recordings had provided the foundation for a larger investigation that uncovered millions in laundered money. He was looking at 20 years minimum. But Nina remained a ghost. I hired my own PI to track her down, a professional courtesy from an old friend who specialized in missing persons. The trail went cold at a bus station in Phoenix, where security cameras caught her buying a ticket with cash, but didn't show which route she'd taken. Could be Mexico, he told me. Could be anywhere. If she's smart, she'll stay disappeared. The kids adapted better than I'd expected. Ava threw herself into poker with renewed intensity, earning a full scholarship to UNLV's business program. Logan's app, a security system that could detect hidden surveillance equipment, caught the attention of a tech company that offered him a summer internship. You raised them right, Sal observed during one of our regular check-ins. They've got your analytical skills and your backbone. They got that from Nina too, I admitted. She wasn't all bad, just weak when it mattered most. The divorce was finalized in absentia 4 months after Nina's disappearance. Since she'd abandoned the marital home and couldn't be located, the court awarded me full custody of the kids and most of our assets. The house, the business, the cars, everything except the debt she'd hidden from me. That debt, it turned out, was substantial. Even after Victor's arrest, the offshore gambling sites wanted their money. But as Sal explained, they had no legal recourse in the United States. And without Nina to pressure, they eventually wrote off the loss. "You're free and clear," he told me. Financially, anyway. I was organizing Nina's remaining belongings to donate to charity when I found the USB drive that had started everything. I'd never identified who sent it, and the anonymous tip that led to Victor's investigation remained unsolved. But tucked inside an old jewelry box, I found a burner phone with a single text message. "Thought you should know what she was really doing. A friend." The number was traced to a prepaid phone purchased with cash. No way to identify the buyer. But the timestamp on the message was 3 days before the USB arrived. Someone had been watching Nina long enough to gather evidence, and they'd wanted me to know the truth. I destroyed the phone without trying to track down its owner. Some mysteries weren't worth solving. 6 months after Nina's disappearance, I was wrapping up a casino surveillance case when Detective Kirkland called with an update. "Border Patrol found a woman matching your wife's description crossing into Mexico near Tijuana. Happened 2 weeks ago, but they're just getting around to checking missing persons reports. Is she okay? Appeared to be. Traveling alone, had proper documentation. If it was her, she's officially someone else's problem now." I thanked him and hung up, feeling an odd mixture of relief and finality. Nina had made it out of the country, away from Victor's associates and federal investigators. She was alive, and she was free to start over somewhere else. That night, I took the kids out to celebrate Ava's scholarship and Logan's internship. We went to the same steakhouse where we'd celebrated Nina's biggest contract, back when I'd thought our family was unbreakable. "Dad," Ava said over dessert, "can I ask you something personal?" "Shoot." "Do you miss her, even after everything?" I considered the question carefully. "I miss who I thought she was. The woman I married, the mother who raised you kids. But that person might never have existed. Maybe Nina was always exactly who she turned out to be, and I just chose not to see it." "That's pretty harsh," Logan observed. "But honest," Ava added. "I respect that." We drove home through the neon wonderland of Vegas, past the casinos where I'd built my reputation catching cheaters and the venues where Nina had built her business. The city looked the same, but everything had changed. That weekend, I did something I'd been putting off for months. I cleaned out my home office and removed every trace of the investigation into my wife's crimes. The audio recordings, the financial documents, the surveillance photos, all of it went into my industrial shredder, reduced to confetti that would never tell anyone's secrets again. But I kept one thing. A single photograph from our wedding day, 19 years ago. Nina in her white dress, radiant with joy, holding my hand as we exchanged vows in a little chapel off the strip. She'd meant those words when she said them. I was sure of that much. I tucked the photo into my wallet next to my PI license and credit cards. Not as a reminder of what we'd lost, but as a reminder of what was real before everything went wrong. A year later, my business was thriving. The podcast had brought in clients from across the country, people who wanted their investigations handled by someone who understood the cost of truth. Ava was excelling in college, using her poker skills to dominate business school competitions. Logan's security app had earned him a full ride to MIT. We'd learned to function as a family of 3, but we weren't incomplete. We were just different. I was reviewing files for a new case, another cheating spouse, another web of lies to unravel, when my secure email chimed with a message from an encrypted address. "Harlan, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed you to know I'm safe. I can't come back, and I won't try to contact the kids, but I think about all of you every day. I hope you can build something better without me in the way. You deserved a better wife and they deserved a better mother. Take care of each other. N. I read the message twice before deleting it without responding. Nina was alive, somewhere in the world, living with the consequences of her choices. That was enough. That evening, I dealt cards for another family poker game. Just the three of us now, but our table felt complete. Ava shuffled with the precision of a dealer. Logan had upgraded his chip counting app to track probability in real time. And I watched them both with the pride of a father who'd raised his kids to see the world clearly. Same stakes as always? Ava asked. Nothing this family can't handle, I replied, dealing the first hand. Outside, Vegas glittered in the desert darkness, a city built on the premise that the house always wins. But inside our home, we played by different rules. We played honest, and we played for keeps. And nobody left the table unless they chose to. The game continued, and that was enough. 2 years after Nina's disappearance, I got a call from Detective Kirkland that brought the whole story full circle. Victor Reeves wants to make a deal, he said. Claims he has information about organized crime operations in Nevada that could help federal prosecutors. But there's a catch. He wants immunity for your wife's part in the money laundering. What did you tell them? That it wasn't my decision to make. Feds want to know if you'd be willing to provide testimony about Nina's involvement in exchange for a reduced sentence for Victor. I thought about it for exactly 10 seconds. No deal. Victor chose his path, just like Nina chose hers. Let them both live with the consequences. You sure? This could put Victor away for life. I'm sure. Some prices aren't worth paying, even for justice. Victor Reeves was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison without the deal. He'd serve at least 15 before being eligible for parole. Justice moved slowly, but it moved. 3 years after the investigation began, I was featured on the cover of PI magazine as Investigator of the Year. The story inside detailed how my work had led to the dismantling of a multi-million-dollar money laundering operation and helped federal prosecutors secure convictions against 12 associates of Victor's network. But the article also noted something else. I'd never taken another marriage case. Corporate fraud, casino cheating, missing persons, insurance scams. I'd handle anything except suspicious spouses. Too close to home, I'd told the reporter. A good investigator knows his limitations. The truth was simpler. I'd learned that some truths destroy everything they touch, and some investigations cost more than they're worth. 4 years later, Ava graduated summa cum laude with degrees in business and psychology. Logan finished his MIT program in 3 years and started his own cybersecurity firm. Both of them had learned to read people with the same analytical precision I'd tried to teach Nina all those years ago. Neither of them ever asked about their mother anymore. She'd become what Nina herself had always been: a ghost story, a cautionary tale, a reminder that people are capable of anything if the stakes get high enough. I kept the wedding photo in my wallet, but I never looked at it. Some memories were meant to stay buried. On the 5th anniversary of Nina's disappearance, I was closing up my office when I noticed an envelope slipped under the door. No postmark, no return address, just my name written in familiar handwriting. Inside was a single playing card, the Queen of Hearts, and a note. The house doesn't always win. Sometimes the smart players just walk away from the table. N. I held the card up to the light, looking for hidden messages or clues about where it might have come from. But there was nothing except the faint scent of Nina's perfume clinging to the paper. I should have had the card tested for prints or DNA, should have tried to trace where it came from, should have reopened the case and tracked down my missing wife. Instead, I walked over to my shredder and fed both the card and the note through the blades. Some games end when you stop playing. 5 years and 6 months after Nina vanished, I remarried. Sarah was a forensic accountant I'd worked with on several cases. Smart, funny, completely honest about her past and her finances. The wedding was small, just family and close friends, but it felt real in a way my first marriage never had. Ava and Logan walked me down the aisle, both of them grinning as they handed me off to my new wife. They'd been the ones to suggest I ask Sarah out, recognizing what I'd been too gun-shy to see. "You deserve to be happy, Dad," Ava had said, "and Sarah makes you smile more than you have in years." She was right. Sarah had seen me at my lowest point, had helped me process financial evidence from Nina's case, had watched me struggle with trust and betrayal and come out the other side. She knew exactly who she was marrying. At the reception, I gave a toast that I'd written and rewritten a dozen times. 5 years ago, I thought my life was over. I'd built my career on finding the truth, but I'd missed the biggest lie in my own home. I learned that loving someone doesn't mean trusting them blindly, and that protecting your family sometimes means accepting painful realities. But I also learned that the end of one story can be the beginning of another, if you're brave enough to start over. I raised my glass to Sarah, to my kids, to the friends who'd stood by me through the worst year of my life. Here's to second chances, honest partnerships, and always knowing what cards you're holding. The celebration lasted until midnight, but as the last guests were leaving, Logan pulled me aside with a serious expression. "Dad, there's something I never told you about Mom." My heart skipped. "What?" "The day before she'd left, she came into my room and just stared at me for a long time. Then she said, 'Your father is a good man. Don't ever forget that.' I thought it was weird at the time, but now? I think she knew you'd figure everything out. I think she was saying goodbye." I pulled my son into a hug, this brilliant young man who'd inherited my analytical mind and his mother's capacity for reading between the lines. "She did love us," I said. "In her own way, she loved us enough to leave." 6 years after Nina's disappearance, I was profiled in a documentary about white-collar crime in Las Vegas. The filmmaker had tracked down Victor Reeves in federal prison, where he agreed to an interview but wouldn't discuss Nina's case. "Some partnerships end badly," was all he'd say on camera. "Smart people learn from their mistakes and move on." The documentary aired on a true crime network and became one of their highest-rated episodes. But what struck me most was a comment from the filmmaker afterward. "You know what's interesting? In all my interviews, nobody, not Victor, not his associates, not even the federal investigators, seemed particularly interested in finding your ex-wife. It's like she just didn't matter to them anymore." "Maybe that's exactly what she wanted," I replied. 7 years after the investigation began, I was inducted into the Nevada Private Investigators Hall of Fame. The ceremony was held at the same casino where I'd caught my first card-counting crew, back when my biggest worry was whether Nina's therapy was helping with her stress. Ava gave the introduction, now a successful business consultant who'd inherited her mother's charm but paired it with ironclad ethics. Logan presented the award, having sold his cybersecurity company for enough money to retire at 25 if he chose to. "My father taught me that truth is the only currency that never loses its value," he said to the audience of investigators and law enforcement officers. "Even when that truth costs you everything you thought you wanted." In my acceptance speech, I talked about the evolution of investigative work, the importance of digital evidence, the changing nature of fraud in the internet age. I never mentioned Nina by name, but everyone in that room knew my story. Afterward, at the reception, an old-timer approached me with a knowing smile. "Harlan, I've got to ask, do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd confronted your wife instead of investigating her?" "Every day," I answered honestly. But wondering and regretting are two different things. I made the choice I could live with. And now? I looked across the room at Sarah, who was laughing with Ava about something on her phone, completely comfortable in this world of career law enforcement officers and investigators. Now I'm living with better choices. 8 years later, I was reviewing applications for a new junior investigator when I came across a resume that made me do a double take. The applicant was a young woman from Phoenix with excellent credentials and an interesting personal statement. "I grew up understanding that truth is complicated, but lies are always destructive. I want to build a career on helping people distinguish between the two." Her name was Nina Rodriguez. Could be a coincidence. Rodriguez was a common name in the Southwest. But something about the phrasing in her statement, the careful way she'd constructed her sentences, reminded me of someone else's writing style. I set the resume aside and called my contact at the Phoenix PD for a background check. The woman was exactly who she claimed to be. Born and raised in Arizona. College degree from ASU. No criminal history. Excellent references from professors and internship supervisors. But one detail caught my attention. She'd been born in Nevada, in a Las Vegas hospital, in September of 2006. She would have been conceived around Christmas of 2005, exactly 9 months after Nina and I had returned from a second honeymoon in Cabo. I stared at the resume for a long time, thinking about timelines and possibilities, and the way life sometimes circles back on itself in impossible ways. Then I put it in the no pile and hired someone else. Some mysteries weren't worth solving, and some truths were too dangerous to know. 9 years after Nina's disappearance, Sarah and I were having dinner at our favorite restaurant when she brought up something I'd been avoiding thinking about. "I got a call from a producer today. They want to make a movie about your case. Something about a private investigator who discovers his wife is involved with organized crime." "What did you tell them?" "That they'd have to talk to you." "But Harlan, maybe it's time to close that chapter completely. Tell the story on your terms, control how it ends." I considered the offer for weeks. Hollywood had a way of turning complex family tragedies into simple morality tales. But maybe that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Maybe the world needed more stories about people who chose truth over comfort, who did the right thing even when it destroyed their lives. In the end, I agreed to consult on the screenplay, with one condition. The story had to end with the investigator choosing his children over revenge, healing over justice. Some victories were private, and some lessons were worth more than satisfaction. The movie was released 3 years later, starring an actor who looked nothing like me married to an actress who looked too much like Nina. It was a decent thriller, though they'd added car chases and shootouts that never happened in real life. But the ending was right. The detective chose his family, chose the future over the past, chose to build something new instead of destroying what remained of the old. And in the final scene, as the credits rolled, he burned the last piece of evidence from his investigation. Not because he'd forgotten, but because he'd forgiven himself for loving someone who'd never deserved it. 15 years after Nina vanished, Ava got married to a federal prosecutor she'd met through my network of law enforcement contacts. Logan walked her down the aisle, handsome in his tuxedo and proud to represent the father who'd raised them both. At the reception, as I danced with my daughter, she asked the question I'd been expecting. Do you think she would have been proud of us? The woman we remember, not the one who left? The woman who raised you, I said carefully, would have been incredibly proud. You and Logan turned out exactly the way a mother would want her children to turn out. Strong, honest, capable of love without being blind to danger. That's not really an answer. It's the only answer that matters. After the wedding, as Sarah and I were driving home through the Las Vegas night, she made an observation that surprised me. You know, I never asked you this before, but do you think Nina planned it all along? The way she left, the timing, even the evidence you found? I'd wondered the same thing myself during the long nights when sleep wouldn't come. The USB drive had arrived exactly when I was most likely to act on it. Nina's mistakes had been just obvious enough for someone with my skills to catch, but subtle enough that anyone else might have missed them. Maybe, I admitted. Maybe she knew I'd eventually figure it out and she wanted to control how the story ended. Give me evidence I could use. Let me be the one to take action instead of just discovering I'd been played. That's either very cruel or very kind. With Nina, it was probably both. 20 years after Nina's disappearance, longer than our marriage had lasted, I was diagnosed with early-stage prostate cancer. The prognosis was excellent, but the word cancer has a way of forcing you to confront mortality whether you want to or not. During the prep for surgery, as Sarah held my hand in the hospital waiting room, I found myself thinking about legacy. What would people remember about my life? The cases I'd solved? The marriage that ended in betrayal? The children I'd raised to adulthood despite everything? Or would they remember that I'd learned to start over when starting over seemed impossible? The surgery went well, and recovery was faster than expected. But lying in the hospital bed, watching Sarah sleep in the uncomfortable chair beside me, I realized something important. I was 64 years old. Nina would be 63 if she was still alive. We'd spent more years apart now than we'd ever spent together, and I could barely remember what her voice sounded like without consulting the audio recordings I'd destroyed years ago. She'd become a stranger, a character in someone else's story, a woman I'd once known who'd made choices I couldn't understand. And that was exactly as it should be. 25 years after Nina's disappearance, I was invited to speak at a conference for private investigators about long-term impact of personal cases. The audience was full of young PIs, men and women who'd built their careers on finding truth in other people's lies. During the question and answer session, a young woman in the front row asked, "Do you ever regret not trying to find your ex-wife? Don't you want closure?" I thought about the question for a long moment before answering. "Closure is overrated," I said finally. Some stories don't have endings. They just have stopping points. The important thing isn't knowing how every story ends. It's knowing when to stop reading. After the conference, I drove home to the house Sarah and I had bought together in Henderson, away from the memories and ghosts of Summerlin. Ava's family lived nearby. She'd married the prosecutor, and they had 2 kids who called me Grandpa and thought I was the coolest person alive because I'd been on TV. Logan had moved to Seattle for his tech career, but visited regularly, usually with whatever girlfriend had survived his rigorous vetting process long enough to meet the family. We were having dinner together, all of us, when Logan's phone buzzed with a news alert. "Hey, check this out," he said, holding up his screen. "They found some woman's body in the desert outside Phoenix. Been there for years, apparently. They're saying it might be connected to some old organized crime cases. My heart stopped for a moment, but I kept my expression neutral. Anyone we know? Doesn't look like it. Says here she was probably in her 30s when she died. Too young to be... He trailed off, realizing what he'd almost said. Too young to be your mother, I finished for him. It's okay, Logan. We can talk about her. Do you think she's still alive? Ava's daughter asked. She was 8 years old, the same age Ava had been when I'd first taught her to play poker. I think she's wherever she needs to be, I answered honestly. And we're where we need to be too. That night, after everyone had gone home, Sarah and I sat on our back porch watching the lights of Vegas twinkle in the distance. The city had grown and changed over the decades, but it was still the same place where fortunes were made and lost on the turn of a card. Any regrets? Sarah asked, following my gaze toward the strip. About Nina? About the investigation? About any of it? About all of it. I considered the question seriously. The marriage that had ended in betrayal. The investigation that had destroyed my family and rebuilt it stronger. The years of wondering what I could have done differently. The nights of analyzing every conversation for clues I'd missed. No, I said finally. No regrets. I played the hand I was dealt, and I played it as well as I could. That's all anyone can do. Even if you could go back and change things? Especially then. If I'd played it differently, I might have prevented the pain, but I also might have prevented everything good that came after. Ava might not have developed her strength. Logan might not have learned to see through people's lies. I might never have met you. So you think it all happened for a reason? I think it all happened, and we found reasons to keep going. That's not the same thing, but it's better. 30 years after the investigation began, I was in my 70s and officially retired, though I still consulted on cases that interested me. The world had changed dramatically. Social media made surveillance easier and harder at the same time. Cryptocurrency had revolutionized money laundering, and the internet had created entirely new categories of fraud and deception. But people remained fundamentally the same. They lied for the same reasons they'd always lied: greed, fear, shame, desire. And they left the same kinds of trails, just in different formats. I was sorting through old files, preparing to donate my case records to the university's criminology program, when I found something I'd forgotten about. A small envelope marked personal in my own handwriting. Inside was the original USB drive that had started everything, along with a note I'd written to myself. In case you ever wonder if you imagined it all. I'd kept one copy after all, despite thinking I'd destroyed everything. Some evidence was too important to lose completely. I plugged the drive into my laptop, wondering if the files would still be readable after 3 decades. The video played perfectly. Nina and Victor emerging from that motel room, their voices carrying the urgency of people who knew they were running out of time. Watching it now, I could see things I'd missed in my anger and hurt all those years ago. Nina looked scared, not defiant. Her body language spoke of desperation, not passion. And Victor's voice carried the tone of someone making threats, not promises. Maybe she'd been as much a victim as a perpetrator. Maybe the gambling addiction had made her vulnerable to manipulation. Maybe she'd genuinely believed she could find a way out without destroying our family. Maybe none of that mattered. I ejected the drive and carried it outside to my workshop, where I kept a small torch for metalworking projects. I held the drive over the flame until the plastic melted and the components fused into an unrecognizable lump. Then I threw the remains in the trash and went inside to help Sarah with dinner. The last chapter of that story was finally over. 5 years later, at the age of 78, I died peacefully in my sleep after a brief battle with complications from pneumonia. Sarah found me in the morning, still holding the book I'd been reading, a mystery novel about a detective who solves his own murder. The funeral was well attended. Colleagues from my PI days, law enforcement officers I'd worked with, former clients whose cases I'd solved. Ava gave the eulogy, talking about a father who'd taught her that truth was worth pursuing even when it hurt. And that family was something you built through choices, not just biology. Logan spoke about a dad who'd shown him how to see through deception without becoming cynical, how to trust carefully but completely. Sarah talked about a man who'd learned to love again after betrayal, who'd chosen healing over bitterness and hope over despair. No one mentioned Nina by name, though everyone in that room knew the story. She'd become what she'd always been in the end, a ghost, a cautionary tale, a reminder that people are capable of anything if the stakes get high enough. But my story wasn't about her. It never had been. My story was about what happened after the worst thing you could imagine actually happened. It was about learning that the end of one life could be the beginning of another, if you were brave enough to start over. It was about raising children to be stronger than their parents, building love on foundations of honesty instead of hope, and choosing truth even when lies would be more comfortable. Most of all, it was about understanding that the house doesn't always win. Sometimes the smart players just know when to fold, when to walk away, and when to ante up for a new game entirely. In my final years, visitors to our home often noticed a framed quote hanging in my study, words I'd written after watching my marriage collapse and my family rebuild itself. A good investigator knows that every case has two endings: the truth you find and the life you build with that truth. The first one closes the case. The second one determines whether it was worth opening. That was the lesson I'd spent 30 years learning, and the wisdom I'd tried to pass on to anyone who'd listen. The house always wins, but only if you keep playing their game. Sometimes the smartest move is to cash out, take your chips, and find a better table. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very careful, you get to deal the next hand yourself. The story ends where it began, with cards on the table, truth in the light, and a family that chose each other despite everything that tried to tear them apart. That's not a perfect ending, but it's an honest one. And in the end, honesty was the only currency that mattered.